Welcome to the Rich, Young, and Powerful podcast. This is the place where we help average givers become everyday philanthropists. I'm your host, Andrew McNair, a financial commentator, author, nine-figure wealth manager, and philanthropist too. I'm going to show you how to give more, how to find more fulfillment, and help you impact the causes that you care about the most. Because when a giver gives more, they receive and become more. And today I have the privilege of bringing on a special guest. She is a producer, author. She was the co-host of The View, business owner, Dancing with the Star finalist, and actor, Candace Cameron Bure. So Candace, welcome to our show.
Hi, thank you. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we're really happy to have you here. I want to jump right in. For those who don't know your testimony, do you mind sharing with us a little bit about your faith journey?
Sure. Well, most people do know me from television, and I grew up as a kid actor on Full House, and have gone on, to do a lot more things in my adult career. But I wasn't a Christian my whole life, meaning I wasn't brought up in a Christian household until I was 12 years old. And that's when my family started going to the church for the first time, just to see my parents were going through some marriage troubles, and the church was there to help them. So I got introduced to Jesus at 12, and I gave my life to him at 12 years old. And I would consider myself a Christian for all those years. And even in television, I would say that I knew God. But as I got older, I wasn't pursuing God, and I wasn't reading my Bible. I didn't know the scriptures. And as I got into my young adulthood, I would say the Christian part of my life was pretty much on the back burner, although again, would always consider myself a Christian and saved. But it wasn't until my early 20s, I had our first child. I've been married for 28 years. That changed once I had kids. And I thought to myself and asked my husband, well, how are we going to raise the kids? And what are we going to teach them about God? And it was at that moment I realized I don't really know about God, actually. I haven't read the Bible, and I know bits and pieces, and I know I love him with all my heart, but I don't even know what that looks like. And I really always just considered myself to be a really good person. And I thought being good would be good enough. That's all God wants from us, is to be a good person. And the desire for me then to really understand what my faith meant to me, not my parents, not having grown up in it, that changed in an instant. So I started reading the Bible for the first time and started learning what God had to say about everything, and learned that my own goodness isn't saving me, that the salvation of Jesus is a gift. It's by grace alone. But I really had to understand that I actually was a sinner and not this good person that I always thought that I was. And I thought, looking at the exteriors of my life, I thought, I'm kind, I'm generous, I'm respectful to people. So why wouldn't God love me? And
Right.
well, God does love me, but not because of those things. I can take you through the gospel, but it was like really understanding the 10 commandments in light of my own sin in my life, that I did understand that I was a sinner by God's standard and not the world's standard. So if we look
And
at
your
even
brother had like a place in that. Like, I've had your
he
brother Kirk
did.
on, and he had a very, a radical shift, a very zealous spirit, which is
Yeah.
amazing. And my journey is very similar to yours, where, I was saved at an early age and had to rededicate my life at the age
Mhm.
of 24, 25, because I went on my own path trying to be good enough. So I can
Yeah.
really relate, but your brother played a part in some of your testimony too.
Yeah, he did. So he was the one that had called me one day and said, "Hey, I read a book that has really opened my eyes to something in the gospel that I've never understood before, and I want to send it to you. I hope you'll read it." That book was called Revival's Golden Key by Ray Comfort. And I knew it was really important because my brother didn't call me out of the blue very often to tell me to read a book. So When I got it, I read it,
It's
and
not like y'all had a book club. You're like, you got to
yeah,
read this book. And if someone tells you that, maybe you should.
exactly. And that's when that book really talked about the law, and it put the mirror of the 10 commandments up against what I considered was goodness and what God's standard of goodness is. And so I'm very grateful to my brother for sending me that book, but it really changed my life because I saw the gospel for what it was always meant to be, because I was always hanging on the reliance of my self-goodness, and to understand that there's absolutely nothing I can do on my own to receive God's grace and mercy was really eye-opening. So when I understood that I'm undeserving of the grace that God gives me, and through his death and resurrection, um, I am righteous before him. I am clean and forgiven. Um, that was like the best gift I ever ever heard. And out of that gratitude did I now want to live my life for Jesus and know who he is
Exactly.
and come into relationship with him. So that was in my early 20s, and man, God has never let that fire go down to a, a very low
Ember.
a low
Yeah.
flame. I've just yeah, to an ember. I've always prayed that God keep that fire hot under me for him.
Well, it's funny you share about your testimony about the mirror of the 10 commandments. The show is the Rich Young and Powerful podcast. So it's a play on the words about the rich young ruler. And so
Mhm.
the same thing happened with the rich young ruler. He comes up to Jesus and says, "Hey, well, how do I get eternal life?" And he says, "Just, follow the commandments." And he uses actually the easier commandments of the ones that are focused on us loving our neighbor, right? Because the first 5 commandments of the 10 mostly focused on loving God and our relationship with God. And he's like, "Oh, I got those covered."
Yeah.
And so that's where it's so important. The difference between the head knowledge and the heart change and the transformation of the gospel is when we realize it's like, oh, I
Yeah.
can't actually do all of these things. And that's why, at the end, as you know, Jesus is like, for men, it's impossible. Like, without me, you're not going to make it to eternal life. You're not getting to heaven without me. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you shared your testimony. That's so powerful and what we needed to hear.
Thank you.
I do want to talk about how you've spoken so openly about turning down roles in Hollywood that didn't align with your values. How did you discern which opportunities to take and remain a good steward of the gifts God has given you?
Yeah. Well, when my life really got on track and right with God, I have always had a desire to please him out of that gratitude for the gift of salvation. And so I'd taken a 10-year break from acting when I had my 3 kids. So I was in my 20s into my early 30s. And when I came back into acting into my 30s, I had a very different perspective because my relationship with God had grown so much, and he um, just set my heart and my eyes on things that were new. And going back into the entertainment industry, I very much saw it now as a mission field, versus when I was a kid and on television it was just about having a great job, um, doing the work, doing it really well, getting accolades, those types of things. And now I thought, well, if I'm going to go back in as an adult and now I have a different worldview and my eyes are set on God, how will I be honoring and pleasing to God with the decisions that I make? And so it wasn't even difficult in terms of conviction, because I just, you know, I had felt like I've always wanted to be in family entertainment, and I don't really have a desire to do anything other than that. So when I would get auditions or scripts to even try out for roles that weren't something that I would feel good about, I just simply would say no. And you never know though in entertainment if there's a point in which they say, "Hey, if you're not gonna audition for these things, then we just don't even want you as a client because we don't trust that we can send you out on everything." But I was very
Mhm.
adamant, and I very much trusted God that if he opened that door for me, it would be the things that he would want me to do. And if it got to the point where my agent was going to drop me because I wouldn't audition for certain things, then so be it. I knew that my relationship with God was enough, and my relationship with God was more important than the entertainment industry or, or what I was going to do. I was like, he truly is enough. And so that was always my
Yeah, I mean, it is
perspective.
courageous to put the priorities like it should be, like with
Mhm.
God first instead of career first, which is so
Yeah.
easy in the American culture to say, no, career, I have to do whatever it takes for me and my family and my future. But that is not what we're called to in our eternal kingdom, having light of eternity.
Yeah, for sure. And I will say, I mean, my husband was a professional athlete. I mean, my husband at that time he retired, but he'd had a wonderful job. I didn't have to go work out of financial needs, but God very much made me this creative person. I enjoy working. I've loved what I wanted to do. I mean, I love what I do, but at that moment, I'm like, this is what I would like to do, Lord. But I recognize that I don't have to do it. So if it's not honoring to you, close those doors because I don't want to do them if it wouldn't be pleasing.
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, back to the name of the podcast is Rich, Young, and Powerful. People want to obviously in our flesh be rich, young, and powerful.
Mhm.
And it doesn't help that the world puts so much societal pressures
Yeah.
on us to stay young. And as I want you to talk to some young man, young woman, how'd you deal with the societal pressures and expectations that come with being an actress or an actor?
Sometimes I don't even know how to answer that because I'm like, it's just, this is my life, like you just deal with whatever arrows come at you. You deal with the conflict that's right in front of you. And I'm a solutions person. So I don't see the world as a bunch of problems. I just see something that I can find a solution to. And it might not be the normal solution that everyone goes to or the one that's been used over and over again. God gave me a brain. And I'm like, if I can think outside of a box, to get around this, to find a way to make it work, that's what I that's what I'm going to try my best to do until God literally just shuts the door. So,
Mhm.
being an actress and having those pressures, I mean, they're just there. So, you kind of find out what you're made of. And do you is it that you have to have thick skin? I mean, yeah, I think you really do have to have thick skin. But um my again relationship with God and the trust that I have in him is really what has been the driving force of what leads me into all the decisions that I make and the pressures that I get through. So when I come up against circumstances that have been awful, I think of James 1 that says, brothers and sisters, consider it joy when you face trials of various kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces endurance. And let endurance have its full effect so that you may be mature and complete, lacking nothing. And so it's this constant renewal of my mind and looking into the scriptures to say, what does God say about this when I'm facing pressures of any kind? I mean, I know I'm going to face that in entertainment, but you are going to face it in whatever field you're in. It's not what if, it's when you do. You're always going
Yep.
to. So what do you do with it?
Well, I thank you for sharing about that internal, work within our faith and our journey that we have to deal and build up that thick skin. I also want to talk about the external. I mean, you faced a lot of public criticism for your faith-based decisions in a lot of arenas, especially when you were the co-host of The View. How do you maintain a spirit of grace and patience toward those who disagree with you?
I wish I had my Bible right here. There's another fantastic verse in First Peter. It's in chapter 3, but it always tells us that when we're facing conflict to always be ready to give a word to that person for the joy that we have within us. and to give it with gentleness and respect. I might have those two words depending on what translation you have. But to give that word with gentleness and respect. So God's scripture is just, I mean, it's gold. And if you really search through the scriptures, God has the clear description of all of the things and the tools that we need, especially when we go through hardships and when we face people that are ugly to us. He tells us how to respond to them. And so it's knowing what God's word said. And then I know that it is not only for me to respond that way, but even if my inherent humanness doesn't want to respond that way, I know that I can through the Holy Spirit, because God gives us that fruit of the Spirit. He gives us the joy, the peace, the patience, the kindness, the gentleness, the self-control that we need if we ask him to. And so even in places like when I co-hosted The View, it can be hostile on air. It really wasn't behind the scenes. We were all very friendly, but I always wanted to conduct myself in the way that God called me to the best of my ability. And so I would just remind myself of those types of words every single day.
It is very important for all of us to hear, because, I mean, Jesus promised us that we're going to face conflict. We're going to face those who oppose.
Mhm.
In the darkness, light is going to have conflict. And so I
Mhm.
think that's an encouragement for those who are struggling at their workplace. As someone, I want to change our focus to be about generosity for just a moment. As someone who's often in the spotlight, do you ever face challenges in giving anonymously, or do you see public
Oh,
giving as a way to inspire others?
it's kind of both. I do find that there are challenges, and I enjoy giving anonymously whenever I can, because I don't ever want to come off as boastful. So especially
Mm,
when it's a larger donations, I like that. I mean, yes, maybe the organization knows what I'm donating, but I think about even GoFundMe pages that you can choose to put your name there, or you can do it anonymously. And I choose to do it anonymously a lot, because again, I don't ever want my donation to make someone else's donation feel small if mine is bigger than them on a platform
that's
like
a
that.
great point.
And also there's this other weird factor that when you do make money, or and that's a well-known thing. When you do give smaller donations, if my friend says, "Hey, I need my pets neutered. I've gotten GoFundMe's on that." And I'm like, "Sure, absolutely. I'll donate $50 to that." And then you can get judgment back saying, "I know you make a whole lot more
Candace is
money than
cheap.
that. Why did you only donate $50 to that?"
Right.
So,
You're going to get judged either way.
yeah, you kind of get judged either way. So, over the years, I mean, I really do prefer to do the giving. God knows what we give, and I feel good and confident about that. But listen, there are times when we're trying to fundraise for organizations, and if my encouragement with a bigger donation can encourage someone else to say, "Yeah, I can do that. I can match that," then I am all willing to say that. But it has to be a very specific event for me to be more public with the amount of um, money with the donations.
That makes total sense. Can you share with us about Skip One Charity, and how
Yeah.
did you discover this need?
Yes. So skip1.org. The whole premise behind this is skip one thing and feed a child. It could be skipping a
Hmm.
pack of gum. It could be skipping that Diet Coke, but it could be skipping, the new car that you thought you wanted to buy, but maybe you go, "I actually don't need that brand new one off the lot. and I could get one that's a few years old. And could I donate that money that I would have saved or I would have spent and donate it to skip1.org? What Skip One does is feed children all over the world. We specifically also have built kitchens in schools where that may be the only meal that these kids get a day. And Skip One was founded by one of my dearest friends, Shalene Bryan, and she just has a passion and a heart for serving the underprivileged. And she started this. I've been on the board. It's been over 10 years, and we built kitchens in several schools in impoverished countries. We've also done a lot of work feeding the homeless here in the US. But what I love about Skip One and the concept is that you actually don't even need extra money to donate. Because some people, like for instance, Val and I, that's my husband, we have chosen about 3 charities that we work with closely because we get presented so many opportunities to work with so many organizations that are all deserving of our time, of our money, of our presence to be there. And yet you can't do them all. And so we really chose the 3 that we were most passionate about and where we give our most dollars to and spend our most time in. And Skip One is one of those organizations. But sometimes we think, okay, well, I've already chosen this charity, so I don't have any extra to give somewhere else. And Skip One saying, actually, we're just asking you to sacrifice something. Could you skip something that you wanted in your day and donate that money instead? And it could be all of $1 or it could be $100. But we're not asking you to dig into your pockets more. Just get something, a little self-sacrifice, and you get to feed people. So I love the heart and the passion behind it. And it actually makes it very tangible for people to understand, but also receptive to giving. Because they're like, I could skip my lunch today. I could skip the $12.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a great concept because people, think I have to make more money before I can give. Once this happens, then I can give. But really, a lot of times there are things that we can
Mm-hmm.
skip or downsize or shrink, and just every once in a
Mm-hmm.
while would help. It'd be great if we could make it on a
Exactly.
regular basis going forward, but we have to start somewhere.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
I do want to ask you, because I know with all of the titles that you have, I felt exhausted just reading all the titles of the things that you've done.
I'm
As a mom
sorry.
who, as a mom who knows the pressure of fame and fortune firsthand, how does this translate to parenting your own
Mm.
children with being generous?
It's always been so very important to us. I married a man who's an immigrant to the US. He grew up in Russia and came here when he was 17 years old to work and had all the opportunity here to be an athlete and play, but grew up very poor in Russia. And so not only does he very much understand that perspective of having nothing to then having an abundance, but I also grew up middle class. My dad was a school teacher. My mom didn't work, a stay-at-home mom. I shouldn't say she didn't work because she worked really hard with us kids, but
Yeah,
she
being a
was,
mom's hard.
stay-at-home mom with 4 kids. So middle class family, and giving and generosity was always very important to us and was really modeled by my mom and dad growing up. So the last thing that my husband and I wanted were to raise these kids that feel overly privileged in the sense that oh yeah, mom and dad can pay for that. I'll just ask mom and dad. We can have whatever we want, whenever we want, at any time. And so between my mentality and my husband's mentality, I mean, the amount of stories that my kids have heard was like, well, I didn't even eat for days and days, or I had 1 apple for a whole day because we couldn't afford food. I mean, those are the stories that they have grown up with, but also, to appreciate the things that we do have. And just as a Christian mom, reading all of the stories, there's so many in the Bible that talk about generosity. And so teaching those principles to our kids at a young age, as well as, we would take them. We went on a trip with Compassion International. That's another charity that we've been a part of for a very long time. And we took our kids to the Dominican Republic on a mission trip with us, and, showed them along with us to experience true poverty. And that was eye-opening for our children and really gave them a perspective as well to understand that not everybody lives like we do in the United States. And so we've done our best to teach our kids about generosity. And, I'm really proud of the way that we have taught them in terms of finances and money, because I think a lot of kids or a lot of people are probably surprised to hear some of the things about our kids. But like, my daughter's been financially independent since she was 18. And my son paid for his college. I mean, he chose, because we were like, if you guys aren't getting scholarships, we're not paying for that. And so you need to earn it. And so my son decided to go to school online, get his
That's awesome.
degree, had to pay for it, worked a full-time job while doing it. And, again, those are all, I'm not trying to sound boastful in any way, but just,
Mm-mm.
we know what it's like to earn our way into where we are. And just because I'm at a certain place, I'm in my 40s. I'm like, but it's not just automatically given to our children. And so we teach them how to do that and how to be generous and giving to others while we're trying to make it for ourselves as well.
Well, there's so much to unpack here. I think what I don't want people to miss is the things that Moses commanded the
Mhm.
Israelites to do, that once remind them of some of the trouble that you came through, and
Yeah.
remind them where he's brought you through and of God's faithfulness and promises. And we should do that with our money, our finances, and the
Yeah.
generosity that overflows out of remembering where we came from. I think is so important. And we
Yeah.
have to do that for the next generation to ensure that they are generous. And then we also want to bring them along with us. And
Mhm.
we need to bring them sometimes across town to volunteer. We need to bring them to different countries so that
Yeah.
they can see how blessed they truly are. And so I think that's amazing that you're not only just teaching generosity in your house, you're actually being a great role model to the greater community out loud. So I'm so
Thank
thankful
you.
for your influence.
Thank you.
Well, about influence, I do want to say there's many Christians that are listening that are in a position of influence.
Mhm.
How would you recommend that they use their platform in the most respectful way, of course, but in the most bold manner for Christ?
Yeah, I feel like truly we all are in a place of influence, because it doesn't matter where you are. If you have people around you, you are in a place of influence. So your influence may be within your very home and your children. Your influence um, may be at work, or it may be through social media, which is for the world to see. And as a Christian, I really believe that we need to use our voice. We need to speak up. We need to speak truth, but don't forget truth in love. That's how
Mm,
Jesus called us to do it. I don't think we're going to change anyone's hearts, minds, or you know, beat them into being a more generous and kind person. And so when we come off as angry and yelling and, I that to me isn't always love. But to be loving is also to be truthful. So we're not talking about spreading cultural lies because they feel better to us or feel more empathetic. There's really, again, it's truth and love. And to be able to use your platform in that way is probably the greatest gift that you can give others, to lead them to truth and do it in the most loving way possible, and is God honoring. So don't be scared. we all get scared at some points, and even I get scared, but the pursuit of honoring God will far outweigh the likes of other people. So don't forget that.
You're constantly under a magnifying glass, but, in our own workplace or our own company, maybe we feel like we've tried to live a God honoring life and we've tried to live openly and outspoken with our faith, but maybe we've messed it up a few times. Maybe we've said something we shouldn't have. We were a little insensitive. How do you pick up yourself again and say, hey, I'm going to continue forward, even though some people I might have tarnished my testimony in some ways, but I want to go
Yeah.
forward and rededicate my life. How would you
Yeah.
recommend to someone that's listened, that's done that and feels like they can't be salt and light anymore? They can't be a mouthpiece for God.
Yeah. That's just a lie from the enemy. It's just that's a lie that's being whispered into your ear because you absolutely can. And God forgives and forgives and forgives. God so desires for you to be with him and follow him. So when whether we trip up or whether we literally dive into sin, we stumble in some way, God God just wants our humbled heart, and he's so willing to forget. You can read through the Old Testament, the amount of times that he has been just blasphemed. And yet, the second a heart becomes humbled, he is right there and willing to forgive and to love and bring you in. So there isn't an amount of
Amen.
wrongdoings in that sense. And listen, if you mess up or you do something that's out of Christian character, I will tell you the first thing you do is just own up to it, confess it, go apologize for it if you can. Talk with that person and try to make it right. Whether or not they forgive you is, up to them in that decision. But if you do that, you can have a clear conscience about it, and you just keep praying, and you just keep talking to God and just asking God to show you to walk through your life as faithfully as you can, and to continue to um, convict you of the things that he wants to shape you in a different way, and ask him to continue to mold you into the person that he wants you to be. And God does that. You can talk to so many people that have been walking this faithful walk for a really long time, and we know that there's not one perfect person. So even the people that we look to as our mentors with the highest standard, trust me, they all have tripped and fallen, and there's sin in their life that you just don't see because it's not in a public platform. So don't think that you're any worse than anyone else, or someone is so much better in their Christian walk. I'm like, we're all just walking. We're all at our own
Mm.
pace, and you just keep reaching out and taking one step forward with God, hand in hand.
Yeah, until we get to eternity, we're still a construction project. I mean, I
Yeah.
want a sign that I could wear that says under construction still,
It's
because
a
until
good
I get
one.
to eternity, that is where I'm at. Where can people find you over the next few months, Candace?
Well, you can find me on socials or on YouTube at Candace Cameron Bure, or Candace C. Bure are my socials, or you can just go to my website, candace.com, and it'll take you wherever you want to go.
Well, perfect. No other upcoming projects you want to promote by chance?
Oh, sure. Oh, I would love to. So you could find me on the Great American Family channel. I have two brand new Christmas movies coming out this year, and or you can find me streaming on Great American Pureflix. So that's the most immediate, and then you can always tune into my podcast, the Candace Cameron Bure podcast, anywhere you listen to them, and on YouTube.
Perfect. Well, I can't thank you enough for coming on our show today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. This was a really nice conversation. I appreciate it and hope it ministers to a lot of people.
Thank you so much. I know it did. Thank you again, Candace. That's all we have for this episode of the Rich, Young, and Powerful podcast. One thing that would really help us both and other new potential listeners is for you to rate our show and leave a comment on iTunes and Spotify or wherever you tune into to listen to our show, the Rich, Young, and Powerful podcast. But don't miss our YouTube channel as well. Our YouTube channel is the Everyday Philanthropist, and that's where we answer questions on giving, generosity, and tithing. And so I would also encourage you, if you haven't already picked up a copy, get your copy of The Giving Crisis at Amazon. You can also listen to the audio version there on Audible, but you want to check out that book because it shares my story from going from greedy to generous. So check out that book. But until next time, remember that when a giver gives more, they receive and become more.